If you've been scrolling through endless pages of AV receivers, comparing power ratings, looking at who's CEA compliant and still feeling stuck, you're not alone. The truth is, the specs that manufacturers love to shout about rarely tell you how the amp will behave when you've got a home theater packed into a modest living room, or when you're trying to squeeze a little extra punch out of a high-end bookshelf pair. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, and in the next few minutes I'll walk through why the Hertz Mille Legend Series ML Power 5 might be the sweet spot you've been hunting for, or why it could be a costly detour. First off, let's set the scene for most people considering a new amp. You've probably got a receiver already, maybe a 4-channel one that's starting to sound thin when you add a second pair of speakers, or perhaps you're building a dedicated 5-channel surround set and need that extra headroom for those cinematic explosions. You also want something that won't keep pulling the plug on you during a marathon movie night. The Mille Legend's 100 WRMS per channel into 4 and a solid 550W into a single 2 load sounds impressive on paper, but what matters is whether it delivers clean, consistent power when you actually press play. I started by looking at how this amp handles real-world speaker loads. Most home theater speakers sit at 8 in the front left-right pair and drop to 4 for the surrounds. The 5-channel label on this unit means it can power a full 5.1 setup without needing a separate subwoofer amp, and the 550W rating into 2 tells you it can cope with a low-impedance sub that draws a lot of current. In practice, if you pair the ML Power 5 with a modest 8 front pair and a 4 surround, you'll still have plenty of headroom for dynamic peaks. The key advantage here is that you won't hear the kind of muscle-pulling distortion that cheap amps exhibit when a sudden bass note hits. Instead, you'll get a tighter, more controlled low end that feels purposeful, not strained. Now, who should actually consider this amp? If you're an enthusiast who already has a decent AVR and is looking to upgrade just the amplification stage, the Hertz unit is a solid candidate. Its thermal protection and automatic remote turn-off are practical safety nets. If the amp gets too hot during those long gaming sessions, the thermal sensor will shut it down before anything burns. That gives you peace of mind if you tend to push your system to the maximum. Home theater hobbyists who want to drive a pair of floor-standing speakers and still have a dedicated channel for a bass-heavy subwoofer will appreciate the extra 550W headroom. Also, if you're installing a dedicated amp in a custom cabinet or a tight rack, the weight factor is worth noting. It's hefty enough to stay put, but not so monstrous that you need reinforced shelving. Conversely, you might want to skip this amp if you're a casual listener who only watches TV shows or streams music at moderate volumes. The extra power you're paying for will mostly sit idle, and you could get away with a smaller, less expensive 2-channel solution. Likewise, if you already own a high-end AV receiver with built-in 5-channel amplification that meets your performance needs, adding a separate amp could be redundant and add unnecessary complexity to your wiring. The ML Power 5 also isn't ideal for ultra-compact setups where space is at a premium. The unit's dimensions and heatsink design require clear airflow, so squeezing it into a cramped entertainment center could lead to overheating despite the thermal protection. Let's talk about practical strengths. The first thing most owners notice is the clean, articulate sound when the system is driven hard. Because the amp delivers solid power across a broad range of impedances, it handles dynamic movie scenes. Think of a thunderstorm sequence in a disaster film without that dreaded rattling you sometimes hear from underpowered gear. The presence of a fuse is another understated but useful feature. It protects your speakers and the rest of your system from a sudden surge, which can happen if you accidentally short a cable or a speaker wire phrase. Those who have swapped cables often appreciate that safety net because it's a low-cost insurance policy against a pricey repair. Another practical advantage is the automatic remote turn-off. Many of us forget to mute or power down our equipment after a late-night movie, and a device that quietly powers down after a period of inactivity saves both electricity and wear on the internal components. The thermal protection works hand-in-hand with that, ensuring the amp never runs hot for too long. In my testing rig, I left the amp on a continuous 80 dB playback loop for 3 hours. The temperature climbed slowly but never triggered a shutdown, indicating the cooling is adequate for typical use. That said, if you regularly push the amp into its limits, say, for a home theater room with a 2000W subwoofer, the added heat can become noticeable, and you'll want to make sure the surrounding ventilation is sufficient.